Are you a strict teacher? And what does it mean to be a strict teacher? Is this a concept from the past, or it is kind of necessary to ensure good classroom management, good error correction? So today we're going to talk about these two concepts, error correction and classroom management. And we're here with Rob Wiley and Louis Morris in Barcelona, Gracia Guzman in Madrid, and Graham Bell in Malaga. I'm Radmila Gurkova. Let's get started. Needless to say, all of you can participate with your comments and questions on YouTube. So first of all, guys, are you strict teachers?
I wouldn't say I'm a strict teacher necessarily. I think I'm strict when I need to be in terms of maybe correction and stuff like that. But if I think back to when I was in school, maybe like some of my favorite teachers and maybe the teachers I tried to kind of model myself on wouldn't necessarily have been the strictest teachers that I had in school. So not strict, but strict when needs to be, I guess. Louis?
It depends. What is strict?
Well,
it's difficult. There are some things I can't tolerate, and so I let my students know, especially if they're being rude or if they're speaking over other students or if they're speaking native tongue very loudly over other students when some people are trying to participate. But I come from a background of working in primary schools where strictness is important, but it depends what kind of strictness. You never shout, you never raise your voice, but you do need to be able to treat every student the same when they misbehave and nip things in the bud, because otherwise it can get out of hand.
Yeah.
So I think there needs to be a degree of it, but we deal mainly with adults, so
we haven't got that problem so much.
I'm sure the TEFL students would say I'm not strict, but my students in English would say probably more.
Yeah.
What about you guys? Graham, Gracia?
I'm the other way around from Louis. I'm relaxed, and I think on the ball would be the better description rather than strict for me with my Spanish people learning English, but I'm strict with my TEFL students. I'm just kind of different.
Yeah, I would say I'm a bit strict. I would say, but especially with when they are not following, for example, they speak Spanish, or if if they are not following the instructions, or whenever it comes to correction, I'm always on them,
Mm-hmm.
But I can always have a joke as long as they understand that whenever I say it's done, it's finished. That's fine.
Okay.
I think it all depends. Yeah, I think that at first it's good to be a bit more strict. Once the relationship is, they know the roles, then you can relax a bit more, you can joke a bit more.
Yeah, I think it's with kids especially, right? That you can't go in being all nicey. I think from the start you have to be strict, and then with time you can kind of relax a little bit more. But I think at the start you need to put those boundaries in place.
Mm-hmm.
The age I used to teach at was 11 and 12 as well, and that's when they start to try to push the boundaries.
Yeah.
And I noticed that teachers that they really respected could make everyone calm down and be quiet just by walking in a room.
Yeah.
Whereas the teachers who shouted, they tried to get a reaction out of them.
Yeah.
So it is really about how you do it. I find with children the best way is to just bore them, to tell them that they've done something wrong, tautologically time and again when they sit there like this, and then they won't do it again. It's better than shouting.
Mm-hmm.
Fair enough. So now that we're talking about classroom management, it turns out that preparation has a lot to do with it. So we can, only with our preparation, we can have very good classroom management, or the other way around. I mean, if we're not prepared. So what are the factors for good classroom management? Let's start with this.
Well, preparation, as you were saying, is key because, if you are running around getting sorted, of course, your class, you're not controlling the class in a way. And I think as well is once you set the boundaries or the rules or whatever in the class, as we were saying before, then things for the classroom management should be limited. Once you have stated what is acceptable, what is not, then you shouldn't have to spend much more time managing the class as such. And I think as well it's all about the positive reinforcement, in my opinion. Because if you celebrate the good things, then and you don't give that much attention to the bad behavior or whatever, then I think people will try to get that attention rather than bad attention. That's basically with kids that happens. Some kids are used to get just only negative attention. So until you transform that and give the positive one, then they will be looking to get that one instead of the other one.
Sure, I'd agree with that. And saying know your student is key as well. If you know your students as part of preparation, then you know what makes them tick and you know why they might be acting up. So you have to ask that question. I think some of the common problems we face is speaking Spanish in the classroom, or maybe dominant students. And in both cases, it can come from lack of confidence with English. So to remember that, to make sure that they have the opportunity to find something that they want to talk about or something like that, without mentioning any classes. There are a few classes that I've had that I tell my TEFL students, this might be a difficult one because they tend to speak Spanish or Catalan. And I agree that if you go in the first time you see them and you say, in this class we don't speak any Spanish, and you explain your reasons for that, you don't just dictate it. So it's much better for you to learn English if you're immersed in it than I think if you have a precedent set. It's much easier.
Actually, in this regard, how can increase the students' confidence? Because you pointed out that if they lack confidence, some problems may arise. So what is your suggestion? How can we deal with that?
I mean, confidence comes from having fun, and we got a couple of people who said the same thing. We've got Michael here who said just remember to have fun in class. Gergos was remember who you are, so be present and listen to them, give good eye contact. That's Beverly. I mean, everyone gives good advice for that. How to make a student confidence is really about your interpersonal skills, I think, as much as anything else, and knowing them and talking about what they want to talk about.
I have a comment here from Paul. He says, I would say I'm not strict. When they make a mistake, I prefer to use it correctly and hope the student pick up on the differences. If their mistake continue, then I would point it out. What to do? No, what do you make of this method? I hope I've read it right. But in any case, Paul says something very important about errors and mistakes. So it has to do with error correction or error management. But just to make it clear in the first place, can you explain, Louis, what is the difference between an error and a mistake?
So an error is something that's fundamentally unknown. So maybe they're saying this in the wrong way, or they're saying the wrong thing because they don't know it's the right thing. Maybe it's some vocabulary they've never come across before. Whereas a mistake is something that they know, if questioned, they could probably correct themselves. So it would only need maybe a non-verbal prompt or something like that, and they'd be able to correct themselves. I think with mistakes, it is important to iron them out, because I think for higher level learners especially, those mistakes become fossilized in the language and you have to try to get rid of them. And I think, we've all had students of a very good level who say he and she wrong, for example, or people, people is, people are. And the common mistakes like that, they're mistakes. They know the truth, they know how to do it correctly. Whereas an error, you wouldn't want to labor it too much, like correct them every time they make an error, because they don't know, and then you're going to affect their confidence.
Okay.
So it's a balance, and we have a lot of questions actually. Colby asks, is there a limit to how much you could correct the students? Tom says he doesn't know when to correct them all the time. Do you think it's an effective way to correct them all the time, every time they make an error? Or what do you guys think?
I think you have to take quite a few things into it before you start. I had a student the other week who made so many mistakes, it's unbelievable. And he's a P5 level, high level student, and he was tired. He had an awful day at work, and I just thought, for this class, I am not going to be correcting him every time he makes a mistake or an error, because I know it's got to do with his life, not necessarily his ability to speak English. I think some of the guys were talking about confidence earlier with the student. If you're error correcting all the time, you're going to eat into that confidence the student has. You gotta follow the cues of your student and see what's having a positive and a negative effect on them.
Yeah, I think it's just about reading the student, right? Their body language, how they're feeling for the day, and then getting a balance. You don't want to overcorrect, but then you don't want to have absolutely no correction at all. And then maybe if a student is feeling a bit tired, rather than encouraging a lot of self-correction, maybe we can just, correct for them. Or if there's other students, a bit more peer correction, So I think it's just about reading the situation and adapting to that.
Yeah. I think it depends in a big way on personality of the student, because for me, if I'm learning a language, I'd want to be corrected every time, personally. And some students will ask for that, whereas other students, it might affect them negatively. I quite like it when someone corrects every error that I have. It's interesting that we asked teachers in a questionnaire about this, and we have some different responses. So Dan said that he tends to never interrupt the student. He tends to always wait until they finish before correcting them. Whereas Michael takes the opposite thing. He says he tends to correct them as they make the error, or at the latest at the end of their sentence. So we seem to have the whole spectrum here. So what do you guys think about that?
Yeah. For me, it depends what we're practicing. If we're practicing the fluency, then I kind of let them go a little bit more. But I guess if I'm correcting something like a tense or conditionals or something like that, then I would correct on the spot. I don't know if you guys would agree.
Yeah, I think it depends on the activity that you're doing and also level. You know, especially with low level learning, to choose what are you going to correct, depending on the objective of that activity that you're doing. With high levels, I never pass a mistake, you know. I may let them finish a sentence and then correct them. Or sometimes, even if they get in the flow of the conversation, I may make a note and then maybe try to address it in the wrap-up. Or even at the end of the lesson, you know, so you can choose also when you can address that. Or if you're doing a web class, sometimes as well, what I used to do was just to write it, and then in that email that we sent at the end of the class, I will address that mistake if I thought, you know, that they could just work on it at their own time.
Gracie, we had a question actually from Ash, for everyone really, but it's just on what you said. He says, if a student makes a lot of errors and you don't want to overwhelm them, which mistakes would you pick up on? So we've all said that we pick up on certain things, but what do we think is most important to correct?
I think for low-level students, depending on the activity. If you are grammar, I will correct the grammar. And the pronunciation, of course, you will correct, but also you have to think that as long as they're trying to communicate, we cannot stop them communicating. You know, and if they are trying to, maybe a P2 student, you're in a topic activity, and they have managed to put together a few words and convey a meaning, I will, you know, celebrate that and then say, you can also say like this and give an example, but I think it's as well how you correct it.
I think it's important to pay. The first thing I always challenge, function. What did I actually understand what they said? So if there's several mistakes in something a student's saying, pronunciation would go last for me. If the function, the syntax, the structure of the sentence is so incorrect that it doesn't make any sense, that's the first thing I would challenge. If that answers the question.
Sure. I have a more specific question here from Josh. How would you correct intermediate levels, so that's P3, during a topic activity, when obviously they're encouraged to be having a conversation, but they're still P3, so they're likely to make a lot of errors?
Yeah, for me it's maybe one of the trickier things and the trickier levels to do, because they're at that stage where they can, you know, argue their point and debate, but they're still, depending, you know, on the student, they still make quite a lot of mistakes. So I think you have to be very particular maybe with the mistakes that you're gonna correct. I guess if I could see in my class plan that we're supposed to be practicing conditionals and they make an error in a conditional whilst during a topic, then maybe I would tend to focus more on that. So I guess maybe looking at the class as a whole, maybe you could focus on a specific point each class with them.
That's good.
I sometimes, when talking to teachers, they tell me, well, I sometimes use the texts in topic activities, which are the activities for fluency, to correct students' pronunciation. So I make them read and then I correct pronunciation, but that is kind of far from the objective of a fluency activity. So would you suggest that texts are used to correct pronunciation, or they have just a different objective?
Depends on the student.
Again,
I think it really does depend on the student and the level, because you have some students whose vocabulary and grammar is amazing, but they would have trouble being understood if they were to go to London and New York, just because their pronunciation is so far off the pace. In that case, yes, I would, but in other cases, it wouldn't be important. Low levels, never.
okay.
Not yet.
So when do you correct pronunciation the most? In what type of activities? The vocabulary maybe, or? Yes.
Vocabulary, I guess, yeah. Yeah, I would say vocabulary, because maybe you practice in a specific area, if you like, and so yeah, maybe you can focus more on that. I do have some students who ask to read a little bit as well, so if we are looking at a text, certain students like to hear me read so they can follow and listen to my pronunciation, but I do have certain students who always want to read as well, so I guess it depends on the student and the group.
I think it also depends on the mistake or the error, because if it's beach, then I'll correct it, because you don't want them to make that mistake and be misunderstood. So it does depend on the severity of the error, I think, also.
Definitely. So what tips would you give, because we have different techniques, right, when correcting mistakes and errors. There are on-the-spot corrections, delayed corrections. So what is your technique or tip that you would suggest?
In terms of an error?
Yeah.
Well, sometimes just looking at the student.
Yeah.
You throw them I think we've all got that look that we could kind of do at the student, and they get, okay, I've made a mistake somewhere in this sentence. Doesn't work for errors, obviously, because they don't realise that they've said something wrong.
Yeah.
I guess if the group are quite comfortable with each other, then peer correction as well, encouraging them to correct each other.
One thing I often tell my TEFL students is it's a habit that we all have, is to echo. So when they say something correct, we say it back to them, even though it's correct. So I try to make sure I never do that, so that when they know if I repeat something back to them, there's an error there, and then they can correct it. So it's also thinking about what we do the rest of the time, and being conscious that we don't echo, so that they know when we speak, we're asking them to correct it. But yeah, other than that, it could just be the look.
Yeah.
Again, it depends on the error. Sometimes I'm straight on it.
I will always. So I will also to options. So if they say something that is not correct, for example, imagine people is. Is it people is or people are?
Yeah.
And just let them choose the right option. For example, or just instead of people, what? Can you repeat that? And then they have to think it twice, for example.
Yeah, me and Tom were talking about this yesterday. Correcting. He mentioned he likes to kind of rephrasing with a tag question. And you can raise your intonation at the top to that kind of strange tone. So they're like, oh, something's wrong there.
Yeah.
It works well.
Yeah.
The question here from Ash is, how would you correct a student who doesn't take kindly to correction or criticism?
Thanks. Very interesting.
It's a good question. I guess we've all had them students as well. I mean, maybe it depends how you deliver it, I guess.
I think that you can't have that approach if you want to learn.
No, that's it. The thing is, sometimes students don't actually want to be corrected, but then they're not going to learn very fast if they're not getting corrected, right? So I think there's ways you can maybe do it. Maybe just repeating what they've said, but in the correct version back to it, so at least then they're hearing the correct version.
Or at least wait until they finish talking and come back to it at the end. I think also if you've got a group, then you can address the group rather than the individual. So that nobody can remember who made the error, and then the individual doesn't take it personally. But if it's just a one-on-one, and it tends to be a one-on-one with those types of students, because I tend to find that they have the money to pay for a one-on-one, then I think you have to correct them nonetheless.
Yeah,
because they have to have the attitude one has to learn. And if you could explain it in a pleasant way, it helps.
I mean, you can
I
acknowledge
think they have to see the benefit.
Sorry, Gracia.
Sorry.
On you go. After you.
No, I was saying that they have to, maybe at first they're hesitant about it or whatever, but once they see the benefits and they see that you are doing it so they can improve, and then celebrate probably whenever they do it right, say, oh wow, like check you out, that was great, then maybe they relax a little bit more. Sorry, Greg.
Yeah, I think it's important to sometimes acknowledge the elephant. If the student is not taking on their learning, I'll challenge them. I'll be like, look, hey, this keeps on happening. Is it a problem for you? Because I want to know, because I don't want to be annoying you if I keep correcting you on this. Because at the end of the day, they pay my wages. I teach them. And if it's not a problem for them, then that's fine. But if they want me to pick them up on them, I don't want them thinking I'm not doing my job properly.
That's it, yeah. Because
I'll address it.
Yeah, I've had students actually who kind of they talk at you at 100 miles an hour, and then you try to correct them, like whatever, and then kind of like they just want to continue talking at you. And obviously, I think they're the students who we probably all had them who maybe don't progress the fastest.
We have a comment here from Paul regarding the difference between correcting low levels and high levels. I think it's very interesting what he says. He says, for lower levels, the only thing I would correct is what we're working on, talking about, or what the lesson is on. Overcorrecting lower levels could kill their confidence. I would get stricter the higher the level is. So does that apply to you as well? How does your corrections change according to the level?
I guess if they're higher level, then in theory going to be making less mistakes, so then you can correct everything that they've done wrong, because they shouldn't be making too many mistakes. Like Paul said, with a lower level, they're making more mistakes, so you have to be more selective with the mistakes or errors that you correct.
And their confidence is likely to be lower at a lower level, so you have to take that into account too.
How about when working with teenagers? I remember that when I first arrived to Spain, I didn't speak Spanish, and I was literally mute for 3 months because I was very shy, and I didn't want to make a mistake. That was it. So not until I started talking perfectly, people could hear me speak Spanish. So what would you do with a student like me?
I understand where you're coming from, because I had exactly the same thing when I went to France when I was younger as well, and I kind of refused to make an attempt to learn the language at the start, and then after I realised, okay, I've got to make a bit of an attempt here, so but then the shyness came out and it was difficult. I just remember lots of patience. No, you gotta have a lot of patience, and eventually in their own time they'll come out.
I think, it was my job in primary schools in the UK to work with children who come to the country with no English. And so I had these one-on-one sessions with them. But to be honest, I don't think they really learned from me. They learned from the playground. And that was in their accents, because they had accents that were nothing like mine by the time they started speaking a few months later. And I think really for this age, it's just, they learned from the playground playing football and doing things that they enjoyed. So it's trying to find the relevant things for the classroom that are going to bring it out of them and make them want to talk. So I suppose that's the main thing to try to do. With children, I don't think they don't have the ego to get upset with corrections.
Definitely
it's
not.
teenagers.
Yeah. How would you, Gracia, approach people like me or teenagers?
Well, I think I will try to find what interests you, what you enjoy, and I will try as well to show that I'm interested in because I think that sometimes that happens as well, especially when you are in a big classroom. You think, okay, if I'm quiet, nobody's gonna notice that I'm here, and that's it. So I will try to find that thing that interests you, or that maybe will enthuse you to speak about, and try to organize everything I do in the class, adapt it to that topic, for example. So once you feel a bit more confident with me, then we can start working with everything. Or probably as well doing it. I think as well you have to be quite clever and not to be very pushy as well. Like try to present things in a very relaxed way. Okay, let's have a look at this video. Let's have a look at this. What do you think? Try to make it a bit more casual rather than I demand you to do this, because then probably you will feel even more on the spot.
All right. So we asked the teachers together for some tips for correction. Louis, can we have some of them? Because they were very interesting ones.
I think we have quite a few here. We said point the error out nicely from Luis. I think that's a really good point. I think it's been made a few times, but praise when they do well as well, I think comes into that. Beverly says she tries to get the student to self-correct using eye contact, things like that, which I think is a very useful effect. And Autumn says, speaking from experience as a language learner, try to correct the person after they finish their thought. I think that really does depend on their personality, but definitely, either way, quite a lot of different advice here. To explain and ask for another to explain, so that's peer view, but I think mostly it's things that we've talked about so far.
Okay, so Graham, you were saying?
No, I really like that comment that someone said there. I'm taking Spanish classes, and my Spanish teacher drives me crazy. I'll be saying something, she'll ask my opinion, and I'm trying to formulate a sentence. I make a mistake, and she interrupts me, and I can't remember what I was trying to say. And I'm like, oh, shush.
Just let me carry on saying, get my point across. Can you imagine? It's quite interesting that actually from the comments from the teachers, there's quite opposite opinions in a lot of stuff, so it shows that it's a discussion worth having. And
I think that's part of the usefulness of the students having different teachers and having different approaches so they can find out what works for them as well. We have a couple of questions just on classroom management.
Fair enough.
One, and I think this is quite relevant to a few classes I've had. Scott asks, Would you stop a student from using Google Translate during the lesson? I do.
This happens in web classes a lot when we're doing it, and there's nothing really you can do to stop them. If they're in person, you can stop them doing it, but I have got it. Yeah, definitely. The whole idea is that they're supposed to think of a synonym or try to explain what the word they're looking for, right, in English. So it's just a shortcut, and they're not likely to remember. I think with my Spanish, sometimes if I'm Googling a word, then actually I kind of forget it unless I've used it 3, 4, 5 times in a sentence. So just Googling the word and saying it doesn't work for me.
Shows that you can use Google Translate.
Yeah, exactly.
But it doesn't. It's not as good for your memory. No, I think that was a good question because it happens so often.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Some other tips for classroom management.
Yeah.
So a couple of people have said about seating arrangements. Do you think it's important?
I think it depends on the class size. If you have a big, for example, in primary school, yes, it is very important. Because if you have 30 kids, you have to think carefully how you're going to sit them and how you're going to sit them for different subjects and so on. But even in small groups, I think it's important that you are facing whatever is distracting. So, for example, if there is a window or whatever, I would face the window instead of them so they can just focus on me. But I think as well, I would, for example, sometimes I've gone to a conference room to start a class, and maybe the students are like at the end of the
some
room
huge table,
Yeah, so I said, I always try to have them as close to me as possible.
Yeah.
And also, if I have a few students, to have them equally divided as well, so I can be like giving the same attention to everybody as well.
Yeah.
So with smaller groups, what's the best seating arrangement?
I mean, ideally we've got a little table, no? And you can all sit around a circle table and we can all see each other. Sometimes, if you've got just a big square table, there's like 4 of them in a row and you facing them and then they can't see each other properly. Yeah. So it depends.
I think really, unless you've got a big board that you can use as a learning tool, there's no reason you should sit in front of everybody.
No.
Just one more on classroom management, because it tends to be something that TEFLs ask every month, and we've got a couple of points on it from the questionnaire. Is what do you do if you have a student who talks too much in a classroom that's a group shared with a dominant student? This is probably the most common problem in classroom management.
Exactly. What do we do? Graham, how do you go about it?
Hi, this has reminded me of one of the students I have. He loves to talk. He's very powerful, loves to ask questions, and will always take you away from trying to teach. I don't know. I've after the class, I've spoken to him. I've literally been really honest and been like, hey, let's try and stick with what we have in the class because it's face to face. We can have that interaction. But if you don't have that opportunity, then you have to take control in the class. You have to be like, oh, very good point. Let's move on. Let's maybe discuss this, or give them the sense of worth they want. Because they're wanting something, but then you have to make sure that everyone cares.
Yeah, I presume was that in a one-to-one class, Graham? Yeah, he was the only. Was he the only student?
No, it was
a group class as well. Yeah,
he's a group class. And he was being very dominant. And literally, I could see the faces of everyone else thinking, "Guy, shut up!" And I had to step in.
Yeah, using the names of the other students as well, right? And being like using their names and directing the question, then forces the other people to speak and helps to shut up the other one.
Excellent. Do we have time for more questions?
It's 1:30.
All right. So thank you guys. That was great. Many thanks for all the tips, for all the comments, both regarding classroom management and error corrections. We'll continue next week. So at 12, as every Friday. Thank you all.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.